The colony world of Haven was humanity's pride, a testament to their relentless drive to reach for the stars. Gleaming cities rose from terraformed plains, their spires reaching toward twin moons that painted the night sky in shades of amber and blue. For the past 15 years, the settlement had grown from a handful of prefab structures to a thriving community of 50,000 souls. It was humanity's first successful extrasolar colony, and none of its inhabitants had any idea they were about to become the front line in a war for survival. Sarah Chen, Haven's chief of security, stood at her office window watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant purples and reds. The agricultural drones were returning to their charging stations, their day's work of tending the vast fields of grain complete. It was a peaceful scene, one that had played out countless times before. But today was different. Today, the long-range sensors had picked up something unprecedented. A massive fleet of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of their solar system. Director Chen, her eye assistant's voice was calm but urgent. The unknown vessels are accelerating toward Haven. Their current trajectory suggests they'll reach orbit in approximately 6 hours. Sarah's jaw tightened. Haven had basic defensive capabilities, a small fleet of patrol ships, orbital defense platforms, and a planetary shield that had never been tested in actual combat. They were precautions against pirates and asteroids, not an armada. "What's their configuration?" she asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. "The ships appear heavily damaged. Energy readings are fluctuating wildly. I'm detecting multiple hull breaches across their fleet." There, the eye paused, unusual for its typically fluid responses. "They're being pursued." Before Sarah could respond, her comm unit lit up with an incoming transmission. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a face that made her step back in surprise. The being looking back at her was clearly alien, its skin a pale blue, with crystalline formations protruding from its temples. Its 4 eyes blinked independently, all focused on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "People of Haven." The alien spoke, its words translated by her comm unit with only a slight delay. "I am High Commander Zextal of the Consortium. We come seeking sanctuary. Behind us follows an enemy that has already consumed 1,000 worlds. We beg you, open your shields and grant us landing rights, or we will all perish." Sarah's mind raced. In all of humanity's history of space exploration, they had never encountered intelligent alien life. First contact was happening now, in the worst possible way, with refugees fleeing an unknown horror. "High Commander," she responded, keeping her voice steady. "I am Director Chen. Before I can grant your request, I need to understand what's pursuing you." The alien's expression shifted to something she couldn't quite read. "We call them the Void Hunters. They emerged from dark space 6 cycles ago. They consume everything. Worlds, stars, entire civilizations. We were the Consortium, 30 species united in peace and prosperity. Now we are all that remains." The transmission crackled with interference, and one of Zextal's subordinates spoke urgently in their native tongue. The High Commander's eyes widened in fear. "They're here," he whispered. "Please. You must decide now." Sarah looked down at her desk, where a simple button could lower Haven's planetary shields. Everything in her training said this was a potential trap. Everything in her gut told her the fear in the alien's voice was real. She pressed the button. What followed was organized chaos. The Consortium ships, nearly 300 of them, descended through Haven's atmosphere. They were massive vessels, clearly designed for deep space travel rather than planetary landing. The colony's emergency services worked frantically to coordinate landing zones, while Sarah mobilized every available security officer. The first refugees began emerging from their ships as soon as they touched down. They were a stunning array of species, some humanoid, others completely alien in form. Many were injured, all showed signs of exhaustion and fear. Haven's medical facilities were quickly overwhelmed. But it was what appeared at the edge of their solar system that made Sarah's blood run cold. The Void Hunters arrived in ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with impossible grace, their hulls rippling like liquid shadow. All citizens, this is not a drill. Proceed immediately to your designated shelter areas, Sarah broadcast across the colony's emergency channels. This is not a drill. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The consortium refugees, despite their exhaustion, immediately offered their assistance. Their engineers worked alongside Haven's technicians to boost the power of the planetary shields. Their warriors, those who could still fight, took up defensive positions alongside human security forces. Sarah found herself working closely with High Commander Zextal, who had set up a command center in Haven's main security building. The alien leader moved with practiced efficiency, coordinating with his people while helping Sarah understand what they were facing. The Void Hunters aren't like us, he explained, manipulating a holographic display to show the enemy ships. They don't want resources or territory. They want to feed. They consume consciousness itself, memories, thoughts, dreams, everything that makes a being sentient. How do we fight them? Sarah asked, watching as the dark ships moved closer. Zextal's crystalline protrusions dimmed slightly. We've tried everything. Energy weapons pass through their ships. Physical projectiles are absorbed. They adapt to every strategy we develop. But he turned all four eyes to her. We've never fought alongside humans before. Perhaps that will make a difference. Sarah was about to respond when the first attacks began. The Void Hunters didn't bother with warnings or demands. Their ships descended through the upper atmosphere like arrows, their hulls shifting form, allowing them to slip through gaps in Haven's defensive screen. The battle that followed would be remembered for generations to come. The Void Hunters deployed ground forces, beings that seemed made of living darkness, their forms constantly shifting and changing. They moved with terrible purpose toward the colony's population centers, seemingly unstoppable. But humanity had something the consortium hadn't expected, an ability to adapt and improvise that bordered on the supernatural. When energy weapons proved useless, Haven's engineers quickly modified their mining lasers to emit randomized frequencies. When conventional barriers failed, they created new ones using the colony's atmospheric processors to generate walls of superheated plasma. Sarah watched in amazement as her people, working alongside the aliens, began to actually push the Void Hunters back. It wasn't their technology or their numbers that made the difference. It was their unpredictability, their ability to think laterally and come up with solutions no one had tried before. Impossible, Zextal whispered as they watched another Void Hunter ship crash, brought down by a hastily assembled weapon that used the colony's gravity generators in ways their designers had never intended. We fought them for years, and yet your people. We're good at thinking outside the box, Sarah replied, allowing herself a small smile. It's kind of our specialty. But the battle was far from over. As the sun set on Haven's first day of war, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The Void Hunters would return in greater numbers, better prepared for humanity's unconventional tactics. But looking at the humans and aliens working side by side, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Because in humanity's darkest hour, they hadn't just found new allies. They had found their purpose among the stars. They would be the ones who stood against the darkness, who fought when others fled, who found ways to win when victory seemed impossible. The war for survival had begun, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. The days following the initial attack on Haven transformed the colony in ways no one could have predicted. The once pristine streets were now lined with makeshift barricades, and the agricultural fields had been converted into staging grounds for a growing resistance. But it was in an underground bunker, deep beneath Haven's central command, where humanity's greatest contribution to the war effort was taking shape. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood before a holographic display, his tired eyes fixed on the swirling patterns that represented Void Hunter movement patterns. Around him, a unique team had assembled, human scientists working alongside consortium researchers, each bringing their own perspective to the problem at hand. There, Marcus pointed to a particular sequence. Every time we hit them with something new, they take exactly 3.7 seconds to adapt. It's not instantaneous like we thought. Kilari, a consortium scientist whose translucent skin seemed to glow with bioluminescent equations, leaned forward. Impossible. We've studied their response times for years. They adapt instantly. Marcus allowed himself a small grin. That's because you were looking for the wrong thing. We humans have a saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. The idiom didn't translate well, earning him confused looks from the alien scientists. But his point stood. While the consortium had focused on developing bigger weapons and stronger shields, the humans had taken a different approach. They were studying the enemy's patterns, looking for weaknesses not in their technology, but in their behavior. Above ground, these insights were already being put to use. Sarah Chen had authorized the deployment of what she called chaos squads, small teams of humans and aliens working together to exploit that 3.7-second window of vulnerability. Their tactics were unconventional, to say the least. Lieutenant Maya Patil led one such squad, currently crouched behind a fallen communication tower as a Void Hunter patrol approached. Her team included 2 human demolitions experts, a consortium energy specialist, and a being that resembled a sentient cloud of gas named Zephyr. Remember, Maya whispered into her comm, we hit them with 3 different attacks in under 4 seconds. They can't adapt to what they can't predict. The dark forms of the Void Hunters moved with their characteristic fluid grace, absorbing light and sound around them. They had grown more cautious since the first battle, but their arrogance remained their weakness. They still believed themselves invincible. Maya gave the signal. The first attack came from Zephyr, who released a burst of precisely calibrated electromagnetic energy. The Void Hunters began to adapt, their forms shifting to absorb the radiation. At 1.2 seconds, the demolitions team detonated sonic charges, sending waves of destructive sound through the air. The enemy's forms wavered, caught between adapting to 2 different threats. At exactly 3 seconds, the consortium energy specialist activated their secret weapon, a device that humans had helped modify from standard mining equipment. It didn't try to harm the Void Hunters directly. Instead, it created a localized field that amplified their own adaptive energy, forcing them to overload as they tried to respond to too many threats at once. The result was spectacular. The Void Hunters, caught in mid-adaptation, simply collapsed in on themselves, their liquid shadow forms dissolving into harmless particles. Clear, Maya reported, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. Theory confirmed. Moving to next target. Back in the command center, Sarah Chen watched the success reports coming in from multiple chaos squads. High Commander Zextal stood beside her, his crystalline protrusions glowing with what she had learned to recognize as amazement. Your people continue to surprise us, he said. We fought the Void Hunters with honor and discipline, with strategies refined over centuries of warfare. You fight them with mining equipment and sound waves. Sarah nodded. Humans have always been good at improvising. We see problems differently because we've had to. Our entire history is filled with examples of being outgunned, outmanned, or facing impossible odds. We learned to get creative. But the war was far from over. Even as Haven's defenders celebrated their successes, the enemy was learning. The Void Hunters began attacking in smaller groups, making it harder to coordinate the multi-layered attacks needed to destroy them. They started targeting Haven's infrastructure, power plants, communication arrays, food production facilities. The colony's resources were stretched thin, trying to support both their own population and the consortium refugees. Tensions began to rise as food rationing was implemented and living spaces became more crowded. But it was here that humanity showed another of its surprising strengths: the ability to build community in the face of adversity. Marcus Rodriguez found himself working on this problem too, though in a very different way from his tactical research. He helped organize shared meals where humans and aliens could learn about each other's cultures. Children from both species began playing together in the underground shelters, inventing games that bridged their biological differences. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," he explained to Kilari one evening as they watched a group of human and consortium children teaching each other their respected versions of tag. "We're fighting for this, for the future we could build together." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young human maintenance worker named Hami Chen, no relation to Sarah, noticed something while repairing environmental systems in the refugee quarter. The Void Hunters avoided areas where certain combinations of atmospheric gases were present, specifically the unique mix created by having so many different species living in close quarters. This observation led to a new strategy. Haven's atmospheric processors were modified once again, this time to create invisible barriers of gaseous compounds that the Void Hunters instinctively avoided. The colony began to establish safe zones, areas where civilians could move without fear of attack. But perhaps the most significant development came from understanding why this worked. The Void Hunters, it seemed, weren't as artificially perfect as they appeared. They had instincts, aversions, and limitations. They could be studied, understood, and therefore defeated. "They're not invincible," Sarah announced in a colony-wide broadcast. "They're not unstoppable. They're just another enemy. And like every enemy humanity has ever faced, we will find a way to beat them." Her words sparked something in both humans and aliens alike. The consortium members, who had been fighting for so long they had forgotten what hope felt like, began to see their situation differently. They weren't just refugees anymore. They were part of something new, something that combined the best of both their peoples. As Haven's second week of war drew to a close, the colony had been transformed. Streets that had once been pristine were now marked by battle, but they were also filled with signs of resilience. Makeshift gardens appeared in bomb craters. Children's drawings, showing humans and aliens fighting together, decorated shelter walls. Even the architecture was changing, as human engineers worked with consortium builders to create structures that served both their needs. The Void Hunters still held superiority in space, their dark ships blocking most attempts to send messages to Earth. But on the ground, in this unlikely colony on a distant world, humanity was proving why they deserved their place among the stars. They weren't the strongest or the most advanced species, but they were, perhaps, the most stubborn, the most creative, and the most determined to forge a future worth fighting for. 1 month into the war, Haven had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a true fusion of human and alien civilization. The necessity of survival had forced innovation not just in warfare, but in every aspect of life. And it was in a converted hydroponics bay, now serving as an impromptu war room, that the next phase of the resistance would take shape. Admiral James Cooper stood before the assembled leaders, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic display of local space. He had arrived 3 days ago with Earth's first response fleet, breaking through the Void Hunter blockade using tactics developed by Haven's defenders. His arrival had brought not just reinforcements, but a chance to take the fight to the enemy. "The Void Hunters have never faced a force like ours," Cooper addressed the mixed audience of human and consortium military leaders. "They've conquered advanced civilizations, yes, but they've never fought anyone quite as stubborn as humanity, or anyone with allies quite like yours." The Admiral gestured to the tactical display, where red dots indicated known Void Hunter positions. "They're used to enemies that retreat, that try to preserve their forces. We're going to show them something different." Sarah Chen, now serving as Haven's overall defense coordinator, stepped forward. "We've proven we can hurt them on the ground. Now it's time to take that knowledge to space." The plan they unveiled was audacious. Traditional space combat relied on formations, on carefully coordinated movements between ships. The Void Hunters had mastered countering such tactics, their liquid shadow ships flowing around enemy formations like water. But humans had centuries of experience fighting unconventionally, and the consortium refugees had intimate knowledge of space warfare technology. Dr. Rodriguez's research team had made another breakthrough. The Void Hunter's adaptive abilities, while powerful, worked on predictable patterns. They expected attacks to follow logical progressions. If one weapon failed, enemies would typically try a stronger version of the same weapon or switch to a completely different approach. They weren't prepared for attacks that made no tactical sense. Sometimes, Rodriguez explained to the gathered leaders, the best move is the one so crazy your enemy won't even consider defending against it. The combined fleet began retrofitting their ships with what they called chaos drives, modified engines that could perform maneuvers that should have torn the vessels apart. Consortium engineers, working with human physicists, had found ways to temporarily bypass certain laws of physics, allowing for split-second advantages in combat. The first major offensive launched 3 days later. A fleet of 30 ships, a mix of Earth vessels and modified Consortium cruisers, engaged a Void Hunter patrol near Haven's outer system. The enemy ships moved with their usual graceful precision, expecting another conventional battle. Instead, they faced what one human pilot later described as controlled insanity. Ships performed impossible turns, their chaos drives creating micro-bubbles of altered space-time. Weapons fired in seemingly random patterns that somehow formed perfect killing fields. Human improvisation combined with Consortium precision to create a style of warfare unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The Void Hunters lost 6 ships in the first engagement. They retreated, something they had rarely been forced to do before. But the victory came with costs. 3 human ships and 2 Consortium vessels were lost, their crews sacrificing themselves to prove that the enemy could be beaten in space. Back on Haven, the war effort was transforming in other ways. The colony's industrial capacity had been completely reorganized, with humans and aliens working side by side to produce new weapons and defenses. But it was in the small moments, the quiet victories, that the true strength of their alliance showed. In one of the underground shelters, a young Consortium engineer named Ixtal, no relation to the High Commander, worked with human children, teaching them about stellar mechanics while learning Earth songs. The children, in turn, taught their alien friends about human games and stories. These interactions led to unexpected innovations. A child's question about why they couldn't play tag with spaceships led to a new tactic for luring Void Hunter vessels into ambushes. The Alliance was learning that their differences were their greatest strength. Consortium species thought in terms of cycles and patterns, seeing connections that humans often missed. Humans thought in leaps and bounds, making intuitive jumps that seemed impossible to their more logical allies. Together, they were becoming something new, something neither side had been before. High Commander Zextal observed this transformation with growing amazement. In all our history, he confided to Sarah during a rare quiet moment, we never imagined that our salvation would come from a species that had barely reached the stars. Yet here you are, teaching us to see warfare, to see everything, in new ways. Sarah watched as a mixed team of human and Consortium technicians installed a new defense system. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, she replied. We're fighting for what we could become together. The war expanded beyond Haven's system. Earth had begun mobilizing its full military might, converting civilian ships for war, and rushing the development of new technologies based on Consortium designs. Other human colonies, hearing of Haven's resistance, prepared their own defenses. The Void Hunters found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger with each engagement, that learned and adapted faster than they could. But it was more than just military victories that marked this period. Cultural exchange between humans and the Consortium accelerated. Alien art began appearing in Haven's public spaces, while human music filled Consortium ships. New languages developed, hybrid tongues that combined human words with alien concepts. Even the architecture of Haven began to change, as buildings were redesigned to accommodate the needs of all species. The Void Hunters had expected to find another easy conquest. Instead, they had become the catalyst for something unprecedented, the birth of a truly unified, multi-species civilization. Every battle victory was important, But it was this deeper transformation that would ultimately prove decisive. As the third month of war approached, a new message began spreading through both human and consortium communications. Together we stand. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise, a declaration that this unlikely alliance would not just survive, but thrive. The next phase of the war would test this unity to its limits. The Void Hunters, recognizing the threat this alliance posed, were gathering their forces for a massive counterattack. But for the first time since they emerged from dark space, they faced an enemy that wasn't afraid. An enemy that looked at impossible odds and saw opportunity. An enemy that had learned that their greatest strength lay not in their weapons or their technology, but in their ability to stand together, human and alien alike, against the darkness. The command center of Haven Colony hummed with tense energy as holographic displays showed thousands of Void Hunter ships emerging from dark space. Their liquid shadow forms blotted out the stars, a darkness so vast it seemed to swallow hope itself. This was it, the enemy's full strength gathered for one final push to crush the resistance that had dared to challenge them. Admiral Cooper stood at the central console, his face illuminated by the red warning indicators that filled the screens. Beside him, High Commander Zextel's crystalline protrusions pulsed with a dim light that reflected the gravity of their situation. Sarah Chen completed the trinity of leadership, her expression fixed in determination as she studied the tactical displays. "They've committed everything," Cooper said quietly, "just as we hoped they would." The plan they had developed was either brilliant or suicidal, perhaps both. For weeks, the combined human consortium forces had been leaving subtle clues, breadcrumbs suggesting that Haven held the key to some devastating new weapon. The truth was both simpler and more complex. Dr. Rodriguez burst into the command center, his usual composed demeanor replaced by urgent excitement. "The calculations are complete. It'll work," but he hesitated, looking at the assembled leaders. "The cost will be higher than we estimated." The weapon they had let the Void Hunters discover wasn't a weapon at all. It was a trap, one that would use the enemy's greatest strength against them. But implementing it would require sacrifices that would haunt the survivors for generations to come. "Begin the evacuation," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of what they were about to do. "All non-essential personnel to the deep shelters. Combat teams to their stations." The next hours were a blur of activity. Haven's population, human and alien alike, moved with practiced efficiency to their designated positions. They had drilled for this, but the reality was far more intense than any practice could have prepared them for. Maya Patel's Chaos Squad took up their position near one of Haven's main power plants. Her team had grown, now including members from 3 different consortium species alongside her human operators. They had fought together, bled together, become a family forged in the crucible of war. "Remember," she told them, checking her modified weapons one last time, "timing is everything. We hold them here, no matter the cost." The Void Hunters struck with overwhelming force. Their ships descended through Haven's atmosphere in waves, their ground forces flowing like living shadows through the streets. But this time, the defenders didn't try to stop them. Instead, they followed a carefully choreographed plan of selective resistance, drawing the enemy deeper into the colony. In his underground laboratory, Rodriguez worked frantically with his team of human and alien scientists. They had discovered something extraordinary about the Void Hunters' adaptive abilities. They didn't just respond to threats, they resonated with each other, sharing information across their entire network. It was their greatest strength, allowing them to adapt to any weapon almost instantly. "Energy readings are climbing," Kilari reported, her translucent skin glowing brighter with stress. "The network connection is at 70% and rising." The defending forces paid a terrible price for each minute they bought. Maya's squad fought desperately to hold their position, losing members one by one. But they had to hold, had to keep the Void Hunters focused on the ground battle while the real trap was prepared. In orbit, Admiral Cooper's fleet engaged the enemy's ships in what appeared to be a desperate last stand. The Chaos Drives performed their impossible maneuvers, human pilots pushing their ships beyond all reasonable limits. Consortium crews provided precision and coordination that made each sacrifice count. Network connection at 90%. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the command channel. Almost there. The Void Hunters, confident in their victory, had committed more and more forces to the battle. Their entire collective consciousness was focused on Haven, on adapting to and overwhelming every defense the colony could muster. They didn't realize that this had been the plan all along. Sarah Chen looked at the tactical display one last time, then nodded to High Commander Zextal. Now, deep beneath Haven's surface, in hardened bunkers designed to withstand the apocalypse, the trap was sprung. The colony's power plants, its shield generators, and every piece of technology they could spare had been modified for this moment. They didn't try to attack the Void Hunters directly. Instead, they created a cascading resonance wave that amplified the enemy's own network connection. The effect was catastrophic. The Void Hunters' adaptive abilities, pushed beyond their limits, began to break down. Their networked consciousness, spread across thousands of ships and countless ground forces, started to fragment. Ships lost cohesion, their liquid shadow forms dissolving as they fell from the sky. Ground forces collapsed, their bodies unable to maintain stability as their shared consciousness tore itself apart. But the price was devastating. The energy required to generate the resonance wave destroyed Haven's infrastructure. Power plants exploded, shield generators melted, and the carefully terraformed atmosphere began to destabilize. The colony that had been humanity's pride, that had become the birthplace of a new kind of civilization, was dying. Maida's squad, or what remained of it, fought their way back through burning streets as buildings collapsed around them. The surviving defenders rushed to evacuate as many people as possible to the deep shelters and surviving ships. The ground shook with constant tremors as Haven's crust began to break apart. In the command center, Sarah Chen watched as her home crumbled. "Status report," she demanded, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. "Void Hunter forces are in full retreat," Cooper reported. "Their network has completely collapsed. Any survivors will be operating as individuals without their adaptive abilities." "And the cost?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Haven is lost," Zextal said softly. "The resonance wave has triggered a chain reaction in the planet's core. We have hours at most." The evacuation continued through the night. Ships from Cooper's fleet, those that had survived the space battle, landed to take on as many survivors as they could hold. Consortium vessels did the same, all previous distinctions between human and alien forgotten in the desperate race to save lives. As the last transport prepared to leave, Sarah stood in the ruined command center one final time. Haven had been more than just a colony. It had been a symbol of humanity's reach for the stars, and then a symbol of what humans and aliens could achieve together. Its loss would be felt for generations. But as she boarded the final shuttle, watching her home break apart beneath her, Sarah knew that they had achieved something greater than survival. They had proven that together, humans and aliens could overcome any obstacle, any enemy, even if victory came at a terrible price. The remains of Haven Colony burned in the night sky, a funeral pyre for the thousands who had sacrificed themselves to spring the trap. But in ships scattered across the system, the survivors, human and alien alike, looked to the stars with determination. The Void Hunters were defeated, but more importantly, a new kind of civilization had been born in the crucible of war. The price of victory had been steep, but the legacy it created would reshape the galaxy forever. 5 years after the Battle of Haven, the galaxy was a very different place. Where the ruins of Haven Colony once floated, a new station had been built. Haven's Memorial. Its unique architecture blended human and consortium design, a massive ring structure that served as both a monument to the fallen and a symbol of the new era that had dawned. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck's main window, her reflection overlaid against the stars beyond. She wore the formal uniform of the United Species Council, the organization that had emerged from the alliance forged in war. Beside her, High Commander Zextal's crystalline protrusions glowed with a warm, steady light that reflected their years of friendship. The last of the refugee ships returned home yesterday, Zextal said, all four eyes fixed on the construction efforts visible outside. Though many have chosen to stay in the mixed colonies. Sarah nodded, a slight smile crossing her face. What had begun as a desperate alliance had evolved into something unprecedented, a true integration of species and cultures. The Void Hunters had sought to consume all consciousness in the galaxy, but instead they had inadvertently sparked the creation of a new kind of civilization. In the station's research wing, Dr. Rodriguez and Killeri continued their work, leading a team of scientists from dozens of species. They had taken the lessons learned during the war and applied them to peaceful purposes. The chaos drives that had once powered warships now helped power a new generation of exploration vessels. The ability to think in ways that defied conventional logic had revolutionized everything from medicine to architecture. "Did you see the latest reports from New Haven?" Killeri asked, her translucent skin rippling with excited patterns as she showed Rodriguez a data tablet. The colony world, chosen to honor the sacrifice of the original Haven, was thriving. Its cities were marvels of bioengineering, designed from the ground up to accommodate multiple species in harmony. Maya Patel had found her calling in this new world. She commanded one of the joint exploration fleets, her crew a mix of humans and various consortium species. The tactics that had once been used to fight the Void Hunters were now employed to navigate dangerous stellar phenomena and make first contact with newly discovered civilizations. "We're picking up unusual readings from the next system," her sensor officer, a crystalline being similar to Zextal's species, reported. Maya smiled, feeling the familiar surge of excitement that came with discovery. "Let's see what's out there. Carefully, but boldly. That's the human way, after all." The decision to expand outward, to explore rather than fortify after the war, had been controversial. Admiral Cooper, now serving on the Council's Defense Committee, had been one of its strongest advocates. "The Void Hunters taught us a valuable lesson," he often said in council sessions. "Isolation breeds stagnation. It's in reaching out, in facing the unknown together, that we find our strength." The integration hadn't always been smooth. Cultural misunderstandings and old prejudices sometimes surfaced, but these challenges were met with the same determination that had characterized the war effort. Education programs helped different species understand each other's perspectives. Mixed communities developed new traditions that honored both human and alien heritage. In one such community on Earth, a group of children, human and alien alike, played in a park beneath the stars. They were using a game invented during the war in Haven's shelters, but now it was played for joy rather than distraction from fear. Their laughter, each species expressing happiness in their own way, echoed through the evening air. The technology left behind by the Void Hunters had been carefully studied. Their adaptive abilities, once used for destruction, were being repurposed to help terraform worlds and cure diseases. The very force that had threatened to destroy all conscious life had, ironically, provided tools to help it flourish. "We found another cluster of their ships today," Sarah told Zextal, referring to the ongoing efforts to locate any surviving Void Hunter vessels. The few that remained were no longer the threat they had once been. Without their network consciousness, they were simply lost beings, many of whom chose to self-destruct rather than exist as individuals. "And the containment protocols?" Zextal asked, though they already knew the answer. The procedures developed at Haven were still the standard, ensuring that no one would ever be able to recreate the Void Hunters' collective consciousness. "Perfect success," Sarah confirmed. "Though honestly, I don't think we'll need them much longer. The last active ship was detected over a year ago." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as a mixed group of construction workers conducted repairs on the station's outer ring. Humans in spacesuits worked alongside beings that could survive in vacuum, each complementing the other's abilities. It was a small example of how their differences had become their greatest strength. The memorial at the station's heart contained names in dozens of languages, all those who had fallen defending Haven. But it was more than a monument to sacrifice. It was a reminder of what they had achieved together and a promise to future generations. Sarah's daughter, named Haven in honor of the colony where everything had changed, was among the first generation to grow up in this new society. At 6 years old, she was already fluent in 3 human languages and 2 alien ones. To her, the idea that humans and aliens had once been separate, even adversarial, seemed as distant as the stars themselves. The latest survey teams have identified 3 new potentially habitable worlds, Zextal mentioned, changing the subject to more current matters. The council is debating where to establish the next mixed colonies. Sarah smiled. Let them debate. The people will go where they wish, build what they dream of. That's something else we learned from Haven. The best plans are often the ones that grow naturally from cooperation and need. As night fell on the artificial day cycle of Haven's memorial, lights began to illuminate the station's ring. They formed patterns that were beautiful to all species, a testament to the new aesthetic that had emerged from their union. Ships of various designs moved through nearby space, some human, some consortium, but most reflecting the integrated technology and culture that was becoming the norm. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be new challenges to face, but humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners in a grand alliance. The sacrifice of Haven had purchased something precious, a future where different species could look at each other and see not aliens, but family. To Haven, Sarah said softly, raising a hand to touch the cool glass of the observation window. To all that was lost and all that was gained. Zextal's crystals pulsed in agreement, their light merging with the starlight beyond. The legacy of Haven lived on, not in monuments or memories alone, but in every mixed crew that ventured into the unknown, every child who grew up seeing diversity as normal, every new discovery made possible by combining different ways of thinking. The darkness that had threatened to consume them had instead forged them into something stronger. Humanity had not just survived, they had helped create a new way forward, a path that led not to uniformity, but to a unity that celebrated differences. It was a legacy that would endure as long as the stars themselves continued to shine.